Courage is contagious, and we want to see it spread like wildfire throughout our nation. Welcome back to the Gold Report, where we hope to inspire you to become 10% more courageous in your daily life. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm very excited to introduce our next guest today. She is a fierce warrior. We'll be right back.
Somebody comes to us when they are the most vulnerable. We have an obligation to our patients to tell the truth as we learned it and to not politicize it. We are performing surgeries on these children that have neither the capacity to make these life-changing decisions nor the wisdom, and the only people benefiting is the medical industrial complex, because the more surgeries that are done, the more money it is made.
Whether you're talking about an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old, I don't see how you can actually derive informed consent.
We all know that we can't be getting true informed consent.
I didn't really realize, but there was a sickness that had been afflicting the profession for a long time.
Our medical industry has objectively been compromised in more ways than one.
You become familiar with the sound a mother makes when you tell her that her child is dead.
Erin Lee is the mother of 3 children and lives in northern Colorado. She is a speaker and writer who started StopGenderIdeology.com and the director of Protect Kids Colorado. She has shared the story of rescuing her 12-year-old daughter from transgender grooming in the public school system on various news outlets, including Fox News, Glenn Beck, Newsmax, Daily Wire, the Epoch Times, and the Daily Mail UK. She released a film last year about their story called Art Club. You can find it at artclubmovie.com. Erin travels the country awakening parents to what's happening in government schools and fighting back against the gender ideology that's harming so many children. We're excited to have her on the show. So we're so happy to welcome to the show today Mom Erin Lee, who is going to share with us her experience, what's happened in her life. She's a mom of 4. Yes? 3. Sorry, you said you had a 4-year-old and I got confused. A mom of 3. I'm a mom of 2, by the way. I don't talk about it so much publicly, but I'm definitely a mom. And we at America's Frontline Doctors and the Gold Report, we are so concerned about these transgender issues. And for me, as a freedom fighter, I'm concerned from the medical perspective, as a doctor, but I'm concerned from the legal perspective that they're trying to take away parental rights. And this is, in fact, if anything, it's more alarming than the medical. So you've been through the ringer on this, and we hope that people can really learn from your experience. So take it away.
Yeah, well, our story, I was kind of an unsuspecting average parent. We sent our kids to public school. We were blindly trusting that they were being well taken care of. And my oldest child, when she was 12 years old, we had just moved to a new town, new school. It was the height of COVID protocol. And we are in Colorado, so there were draconian lockdowns on the kids. And she hadn't made a single friend her age. And she was kind of, retreating into a depression, and she was socially isolated. And one day her art teacher asked her to stay after school for art club. Again, this is 6th grade. She was 12 years old. And so we gave our permission for her to go to art club. When she got there, it was actually a secret gender and sexuality club, or GSA. And the art teacher had brought in a radical outside activist. This woman runs an organization called Skittles for kids 2 to 11 and Splash for kids 12 and up to talk about gender and sex. She holds meetings throughout the community, in our libraries, in multiple school districts. And they just did unthinkable things with the kids. They said, if you're not fully comfortable in your biological sex, that means you're transgender. And what 12-year-old girl with no friends at the height of COVID in a new town who's just started puberty is fully comfortable in their body? So of course my daughter adopted that label. She was celebrated for it. She was given flags and stickers and bracelets. They talked about polyamory. which I had to Google when she came home and told me what happened. They talked about how to get puberty blockers in the state of Colorado and not tell your parents, how to seek mental health counseling in the state of Colorado and not tell your parents. They repeatedly reiterated parents might not be safe. It's okay not to tell your parents about these meetings or how you're feeling. And as my daughter left the room that day, her teacher even pulled her aside and said, remember, you don't have to tell your parents about this. And so we're lucky that she came home and told us about the club meeting, but it was too late. I mean, in 90 minutes, they had captured my vulnerable little girl and convinced her that her normal pubescent discomfort and social awkwardness means she's actually a transgender boy. And she latched onto that. It took a long time to get her out of it.
Oh, whoa. I've heard a lot of stories, but that is, I had a lot of questions for you, which was how long it took, et cetera. This is incredibly important. So just the introduction of the concept by motivated activists was absolutely enough because they're getting them at a really young age. I have a lot of questions for you. You started out by saying you'd moved to a new town. She didn't have friends because she is new. Do you think that the teacher specifically sought her out because she felt she was vulnerable?
100%. She was visibly vulnerable. And the way she described it to us, it was study hall the last period of the day. And her art teacher was her teacher for that class. She was sitting alone on the bleachers. And the teacher approached her unsolicited and asked her, hey, you look lonely. Do you want to make some friends after school in this art club? And posed it as an art club, an opportunity to make friends. So she was targeted for her visible vulnerability. And I should mention too, they were planting seeds. Now, I was not wise to this prior to this incident happening, but they had been asking her pronouns, assigning books that are entirely about transgenderism in 4th and 5th grade. They do an overnight eco week trip where they go into the mountains alone with no service with teachers and counselors. And that's where boys were sleeping in the girls' bunk, girls were sleeping in the boys' bunk. She became very confused about what this meant, how these kids were identifying. She didn't express that to us at the time, but we would later find out that they had been planting seeds of transgenderism for years prior to the art club.
Oh my gosh. Do you think in looking back, and I'm asking this as a physician, and I'll share why in a moment. So she had not expressed any interest in this subject prior, correct?
Never. In fact, she was a very feminine little girl. I mean, wanted her room to be pink and loved bows and dresses and ponies and Barbies, and very feminine little girl.
So when I was in medical school, which is some time ago, I happened to have taken a course in, we called it back then sexual dysfunction. I guess gender identity disorder would have been the ultimate diagnosis in the 90s, which what we now call gender dysphoria. But I am so struck in the 21st century versus what it was. So classic gender dysphoria is really something that has plagued somebody for many, many years. So they kind of had this gender discomfort really always since they were very little. It was always classically part of the diagnosis. And they went on like this for years. Often they would cross-dress, and then eventually they would present to a doctor, some of them, and get kind of put into this gender identity disorder program. And it was typically male, and typically they were middle-aged male by the time they presented. So I have experience with this. What we're seeing is not that. I call this, and I don't know how familiar you are, you're probably very familiar, but for our audience, rapid onset gender dysphoria, which the activists don't like us using that phrase. They want to pretend that this is all the classic gender dysphoria, which we typically saw in middle-aged men. But rapid onset gender dysphoria is exactly as you describe. There can be an online community or there can be a social community that introduces the concept to kids that didn't have this concept in their head before.
Right. ROGD, and I actually run a support group for parents of ROGD children, rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it's eerie how similar our stories are. I mean, it's usually adolescent girls, 11 to 15-year-old girls who are going through the discomfort of puberty, who are socially awkward and, comparing themselves against societal standards of women. At least 50% of the parents I talk to, their kids are autistic or on the spectrum. So they're, inherently socially awkward. And yeah, this was rapid onset. There was no
Yeah.
sign prior for her.
So I'm going to point at the evil of doctors misdiagnosing. Just for example, there's a lot more to the whole diagnosis of classic gender dysphoria. But what we can say 100% is they have nothing to do with rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is clearly a social contagion. Clearly, you cannot account for the rapid increase in the numbers of people this is happening to. You can't account for the biological sex disproportionate that it's young adolescent females. So I just want to first point that out to anybody listening, that if you're hearing this for the first time and you have a child who suddenly is kind of expressing this, you have to be on guard from the doctors. That's a huge, huge problem. The doctors putting you down a garden path. So when your daughter came to you, fortunately, before you get to the fact that it took a long time to work your way through this, how did you initially handle it? Are you married? Her father's
Married. Yep. We've
Did
been
you
together
handle it?
since we were young, been married 17 years. So we were caught off guard. I mean, it was a regular Tuesday, and she came home and handed us this transgender flag, which I didn't even know what it was. I had to Google it. And I approached it very carefully, and I should backtrack and say, politically, I was not conservative at the time. We were not religious, really practicing religion. I had been trained in elementary education. That's my undergrad. And I believe I had been indoctrinated to think this could be real. And so when it happened, I was really careful with how I approached it. I didn't want to alienate her or, create a wall where she wouldn't talk to me so openly. Whereas my husband instantly, and, politically, religiously the same, was like, absolutely not. This is not real. We're not doing this. Our reactions were very different. And how we approach her. And he kind of let me handle her. He didn't want to say anything he couldn't take back. So they went about a week without really speaking at all because he just didn't know what to say. And that was incredibly damaging for our relationship with our daughter. And, we sought therapy thinking, okay, I clearly don't know how to handle this. This is foreign. I don't understand what she's going through. Let me seek professional help. And that's when we found out the hard way in Colorado, where we live. In 2019, they passed a law that banned conversion therapy with specific language around gender confused youth. So licensed therapists are legally obligated to only affirm gender confusion. They can't question it. And so the therapist pushed her further down the path of confusion that ultimately led to her becoming suicidal. And I should mention that they told her in art club that being trans makes you more likely to kill yourself. She didn't even know what suicide was prior to the meeting. But then these therapy sessions just made her more confused, which made her more depressed, which led her to suicidal thoughts. So their doctors made it worse. We have a very healthy fear of all medical practitioners now because they harmed our child.
Totally harmed. By the way, this is one of the reasons I keep speaking out. I'm so offended as a physician. We had taken oath to do no harm. That the reason that is first and foremost to doctors is because we can do a lot of harm. So to watch doctors violate it willy-nilly is offensive, and that the government is helping them. So what Erin is talking about, for those who are not familiar, is gender affirming care, which sounds all positive because that's often what they do, is they make things sound different than they really are. Gender affirming care is actually a terrible, terrible thing. It means you affirm whatever the child's believing that day. So a girl might think she's a boy and a boy might think she's a girl. And more recently, we've had people who say, I think I'm a eunuch. A eunuch is a boy with no testicles. They literally will say, I'm a eunuch. And then the gender affirming doctor will go, great, you're a eunuch. Let's help you be a eunuch. This is literally what it means, gender affirming care. And you're right, Colorado is a horrific policy, which is not only are the doctors required to affirm, if they actually don't affirm, they can lose their license or come into jeopardy with their license. So you didn't stand a chance in that world. So you started her with, so the family, I guess, or you and your husband went to therapy. Did your daughter?
Yeah. So we met with the first therapist who said, well, I'm queer and trans affirming. And we went, no, we're not doing that. So we went to another one who seemed pretty neutral, but kind of required private sessions with her, and we saw her getting worse. Then we opted for a religious therapist, a Christian counselor, thinking, okay, just a Christian counselor. She avoided the subject because she knows she can't touch the issue for fear of losing her license. And so the avoidance continued to make my daughter worse. And it gets even worse than that. So she becomes suicidal. She leaves us a suicide note. which is the scariest day of my life. She's 12 years old. I wake up every morning, then go into her room wondering if she'll be alive. It's a terrifying position to be in. And we say, okay, we can't take her to therapist. That made it worse. Let's take her to her pediatrician, who we know and trust, who's cared for all 3 of our kids. And she has me leave the room for the mental health assessment. And when I come back, she's already written a prescription for Zoloft for my daughter. And that's because in 2019, they passed another law, which makes 12-year-olds the steward of their own mental health care. So no parent knowledge or consent required, including prescribing psychiatrists and pediatricians. So I had no choice but to allow her to take Zoloft.
So I have like no words. First of all, doesn't mean much, but I just want to apologize. I could actually come to tears on this. I want to apologize on behalf of the medical profession because we're not all like that. It's very upsetting. It's very upsetting. There's so many things wrong with what you said. Number one, the Zoloft, the SSRIs, they don't really do much. The amount of antidepressant effect they have is about the same as a 30-minute walk per day. So in general, they are overprescribed massively. So in general. Second of all, that Colorado has a law that a 12-year-old can be in charge of these things is absolutely horrific. And that they excluded you. And so you're on this journey. I can't imagine the pain of this journey and the fear, the absolute fear. So tell us, lead us, keep going.
Yeah, well, we allow her to take the Zoloft. We fill the prescription. And in Colorado, parents have to fill it and pay for it, but they don't have to consent to it. And it physically made her sick. It gave her headaches. It made her nauseous. We eventually weaned her off of it. And I don't even think she realized we had weaned her off. It did nothing for her. But it was about 9 months.
I'm sorry, Lexi, she could have taken a 30-minute walk per day. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay.
It's wild. Or gotten her in an activity, right? Like gotten her around other people. But it was about 9 months after all of this had started that Dad found a laptop in her room. And I should backtrack and say, first day after art club, we took her out of public school.
That was one of my
no-brainer. No way we're sending her back to that public school. And in doing that, the school district involved Child Protective Services. Because if we're not allowing her to come back to your harmful environment, surely we're abusive. And they sent a mandated reporter to our home. We're one of the lucky ones who evaded losing our children over this. We didn't understand our rights at the time. We let the mandated reporter into our home. Now understanding through families like the Colsads in Montana and the Indiana family that we could have lost our children. As a result, if my daughter had said my parents are not affirming my trans confusion, they would have taken her out of our home. And we came that close to losing our child 2 days, after this incident had happened, when we are at our weakest moment as a family, just completely confused about what's going on. So we removed her. We cut off toxic friendships. We cut off the cell phone. We cut off the internet. We stopped the video games. We cut every toxic influence that could potentially be feeding this into her life. And it helped, but it took us about 9 months to get her out of the confusion. And it was one day when Dad went into her room and he found an old school laptop that they had given her during COVID that had unfettered access on Google Teams where she could talk to adults. She could search the internet. We didn't know she still had it. And she was having conversations via Google Chat on the school's system, the school district system, with other people about how she was trans. My parents don't understand me. I'm really a boy named Toby. I'm so miserable. And he sat her down at the kitchen table and said, is this really how you feel? Like, is this real? Do you think you're a boy? Do you think I don't love you? Do you think I don't support you? And you could just see the relief on her face. It was like she was waiting for one of us to give her an off-ramp through all of this. We were avoiding it and asking for outside help, but we weren't having direct conversations with her about it. And it was almost like she was relieved, like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I want out. I want off. I want to be me again. And that was the turning point for us. And I wish we had done it sooner. We went through months and months of torture, all of us. And she was just waiting for us to be honest.
So
he just wants a hug.
I love it. I love it. You're a good mom. We could say hi. So, oh my gosh. So you've given us a lot of information. One is that you had a husband and wife who were on the same side, which is, even though you approached it differently, it was an intact family who really loved the children and you weren't at war with each other. I'm sure but to share with the audience, if there's a husband and a wife, a mother and a father who don't agree on this issue, almost every state government via the judge is going to go with the gender affirming parent, which is an unmitigated disaster medically. And it's such a disaster just for parental rights in general. The judges should not be weighing in on this. I think it's what I call, as a lawyer, call judicial activism. They can leave it alone. So when the judge is like, well, I have to do something. No, you don't. This one could be left alone. You don't have to jump into it. But we are living in a time when the judges, if you end up in a divorce or custody battle situation, the judges are going to weigh in on this. I'm very happy that in your situation that you did find that computer and you did have an honest conversation. It is true that many children need that off ramp. I mean, I'm sure you're such an expert on this now. I'm not a bigger expert on this than you are, but they need that off ramp. And the further they get on the ramp that they're on, which is giving them a lot of positive reinforcement, all of a sudden she has a social group. She's got people to talk to. There's a teacher and she's special. She's really special. She's maybe not the cheerleader or she's the president of the class, but she's really special. And so we have to understand that we're giving kids a lot of positive feedback when they enter like this path. So even if they don't really want to be on this path, which fortunately your daughter really didn't want to be on this path, it's hard to get off because they're getting so much positive reward. So I'm very glad. So some of the smartest things you did, you just out of your own temperament and personal background, you didn't overreact when she came to you initially, but you pulled her right out of the hostile environment as much as you could at the time. It sounds like you didn't really take it out on her. You really tried to understand her perspective. You trusted your instincts that this therapist wasn't good, this therapist wasn't good. So there's the damage going on, but you were trusting your instincts and pulling her out of situations that you thought were bad. So 9 months is a break, is a change, is a shift for you. I'd love to hear about, the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, you're never really in the clear, right? We went months not getting too excited about anything and not being cautious not to really talk about it too much with her. But she's in a place now, and this was 3 years ago, right? This happened in May of 2021, the art club. She's now 15. She's got her driver's permit. She's thriving in a private Christian school where she's really removed all of the negative influences. And she's now in a position where she's okay talking about it openly. She's even shared her story with her classmates. She has felt the need to come with me to a protest against a child drag show here in town. And she had the courage to go up and talk to gender confused girls and say, hey, I understand what you're going through. I used to go through it too, and just have really honest conversations. So I could not be more proud of how far we've come. And I recognize that we're one of the lucky few that our story is very common, the indoctrination and the confusion part, but the coming out on the other side is very rare. It is very hard for children to get out of what I believe is a very cult-like mechanism. I mean, gender ideology is a cult. And that's the reason it's not easy for kids to have an off-ramp. Yeah. I have a friend who is also suing the school district here, not same school district, different school district here in Colorado for a secret gender transition formally through one of those gender support plans of her daughter. And the first time I met her daughter, 15 years old, she comes up and she says, I need advice on how to be myself at school, on how to come out as myself. Because I've been trans for a few years at school, and now I'm afraid that none of the students or teachers, she was afraid of the adults in her school environment not accepting her for being herself, her biological sex, who she's always been, her family supporting her. But it's so telling of the environment that our kids are up against when they're afraid adults in their school won't accept them for being themselves.
The adults have a terrible agenda here. They're not going to be forgiven, in my opinion. Yeah. So, again, if you're not that experienced with this, there's multiple stages to this. There's social transitioning, and then there's the medical. And the activists, and I've thought of this because you said it's very cult-like. It is very cult-like because it starts slow. The activists push social transitioning, and social transitioning is portrayed to the parents as no big deal. And social transitioning could include like changing your name, changing your pronouns, for a girl wearing a binder, for a boy tucking the genitals, which it's just still a hard thing to even say. It turns out, and this is medical advice I'm sharing with people broadly, that it's not at all benign, that the vast majority of kids who do social transitioning continue on to do the medical, which is the puberty blocker and then the cross-sex hormones. So it is not a benign decision. It is not a loving decision to say, Bobby, I'm going to call you Sally. Sally, I'm going to call you Bobby. Or Sally, you can bind your breasts. Or Bobby, you can tuck your genitals. It's not a small matter. If there's one thing I want to have people hear, it's like an on-ramp that's very difficult to get off. It's like getting on a treadmill, very difficult to get off. Had you pulled her out of any like kind of physician exposure? I'm interested in this as a doctor. Like, had you just been like, we're done with doctors, you know?
Yeah, she hasn't been back to a doctor since.
Yeah, agreed. There are ethical doctors around. I'll talk to you about that off air. But it's difficult. It's really difficult.
Well, and the problem we're seeing there is that a lot of the ethical doctors are not in the insurance network. They see the flaws in the medical system, and they don't take insurance. And so I found one good doctor, but they don't take traditional insurance.
Right.
So it's a struggle.
So the cult has extended to my professional peers. So the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is the largest pediatric organization. Of course, American Medical Association is not as large as it sounds. It probably represents 25% of doctors, if that, but still it's got a big fancy name. They go with the gender affirming. And so if you have a pediatrician who's a member of American Academy of Pediatricians, you already know the answer you're going to get. And so it's pretty wise to step aside. So I'm so glad to hear of the positive results. And I guess you are going to stay, and you're obviously staying active in this cause to help other families.
Very, very active. You know, we took a year to get her out of it, and that was our primary focus. But I instantly started speaking up at the school board, and I came to find out really quickly that this was an intended agenda. They didn't want me to find out about the meeting. They were prepared for handling parents like us. They called us public record emails. They called us barriers that needed to be removed. Parents who find out about the secret club, they said we had no right to know it was happening. They very much was an intended agenda that we weren't supposed to find out about. And they doubled down on it.
Do you see this as bigger than children and bigger than your child and even bigger than medical? Like, do you recognize this? Because I do, and I'm curious if you do, as essentially communism, where the parent and the child relationship is not the most important thing, but the government is.
1,000,000%. And I struggled with that. You know, when this kind of thing happens, you go, to what end? And I started digging and falling down a rabbit hole that keeps going. I'm still deep down in the rabbit hole of how far gender ideology extends in all of the systems, the school system, the social services system, the medical system, legal system, and all roads lead to Marxism, to separate the child from their parent and to confuse children about fundamentally who they are. If you can confuse them about their gender at 10 years old, you can convince them of anything. And they're shoving propaganda. And I'm so glad you touched on social transition not being benign. I have experienced it being incredibly damaging, and parents are sold this suicide myth. When this happens, we're automatically told if you don't allow your child to transition, they will kill themselves. Do you want a dead daughter or a living son is the go-to phrase. And what I've experienced is that affirming it led to suicidality, that this impossible endeavor to become the opposite sex is what led my daughter to be suicidal, not my reluctance to affirm it.
Yeah. So let me share with the audience just a few things. Social transitioning really puts you on the path to medical transitioning. It turns out that the suicide risk is higher if you go down this medicalization, this fantasy of pursuing a different biological sex. It actually leads to a higher chance of suicide. And something that you may not know, which is that the majority of children that are put on this kind of transgender treadmill have underlying other serious diseases. That's something I didn't know a few years ago. So many of them, as you said, Erin, are autistic or on the autistic scale, which already makes it's socially more difficult, and they might feel more lonely. A lot have depression or anxiety. And a lot are just targeted by the adults. And the adults clearly have an agenda. I see it as very political, just to make very unhappy children and families take away parental rights. So this is incredible. Will you tell everybody again the name of organization or people that they can help or hear from you, et cetera?
Yeah, so I founded Stop Gender Ideology, just stopgenderideology.com. I know it's a mouthful, but that's just a resource for parents going through it or parents who want to inoculate their kids from this ideology. I cannot stress enough that it's coming at them from every angle. I encourage never to put your kids in the public school. Nowhere is safe. It's not just here in Colorado, but you've got to inoculate them from this ideology because it's on cartoons, it's on billboards, it's everywhere they go. It's inevitable that they'll be faced with it as normal, as you can be any gender you want. So inoculate them. I also founded Protect Kids Colorado, or co-founded, to push policy here in Colorado to push back on all this radical legislation that has stripped our rights and is harming our kids. But I encourage parents to look into Our Duty. Partners for Ethical Care is another. These are all started by moms like me who have been through this issue. Therapy First is a great group of therapists who take the gender critical approach, who don't automatically affirm. It's very hard to find therapists in this situation. So Therapy First is a good go-to. GenSpect is another international organization that tackles this issue. So I encourage all parents to do research, whether or not you've been affected by this. I think you touched on Abigail Schreier's Irreversible Damage. That's the first book I read when this happened, and it really helped me understand how we got here. You know, it felt like I was alone on an island, like I was the only one this was happening to. And after going public, I've had thousands and thousands of families come forward. It is such a prevalent issue. It's just not something a lot of people are willing to talk about. And, you know, I get death threats. I've had home break-ins. We've had our children threatened to be taken away. I understand why people don't speak up, but it's something we have got to start talking about, or it's not going to get better.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. So I also just want to add to that list a book that was very transformative for me, Lost in Trans Nation. You're probably familiar with it. I think it should be required reading probably for every American, certainly every parent, whether you're going through this or not. It's unbelievable, and it also has a lot of resources at the end. So the reason I especially wanted you on the show, Erin, is because the whole purpose of my doing these podcasts is to encourage everyone listening to be 10% more courageous in their daily life. So we love to talk to people who are doing something about what they see, whatever lane it is that they land in, that they see. Everyone can do something. Everyone can do more. Everyone can raise up something in a conversation, or in your case, you really went the distance with starting a nonprofit or a service of information for parents. So that's why we love people like you, Erin, which is people like Americans that are going out and making their own solutions, which is great. And I guess I have one final question, because I'm curious if you would jump into it. You can see that I'm Jewish, but in the last 4 years, I've certainly allied with a lot of righteous Christians, because they have seen from the beginning that this is a battle. You know, it's God versus no God, which is what I said. So you had said at the beginning that you weren't particularly religious. Eventually you find your way to a Christian school. I don't know if it was good or bad, but I'd love just to hear your free thoughts on religion and God, and like how that plays into this, and what you think about that to close it out.
Oh, happy to. We are all born again. My husband, my daughter, and I got baptized about 6 weeks ago.
Oh,
This brought us to our knees, and we had nowhere else to turn. You know, everything in the world deceived us, and then we turned to God. We started praying. We started finding relationship in people who surrounded our family with love and prayer. And I think that's the reason we were able to get out of it. And I think the Lord is using us to further this message and to protect other children and families. And so we're incredibly strong believers at this point. I call us baby Christians, but where everything we do is led by faith at this point. And, you know, when I talk to parents who don't have faith in their life, I said, I've tried everything. I said, I know, and there's one more thing you need to try. And that's continues to be my advice. So I do believe it's a spiritual battle. I believe there's a battle for the souls of our children. And, you know, there's a reason they're going after children. They're easy, vulnerable targets, and it's very much a spiritual battle. So yeah, we're very strong in our faith now. We actually made a movie about what happened to our family. It's called Art Club. It's at just artclubmovie.com. It's free. It's on our heart to never put it behind a paywall. I paid out of my own pocket and fundraised to make it happen, because we want other families to understand this can happen to anyone. We're a very normal, average family. If it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. And we tied in experts like Quentin Van Meter, the president of the College of Pediatricians, and Mike Ferris from ADF, and David Barton, and January Littlejohn, who's a mom like me, who's also a counselor, Alex Newman, brilliant journalist who really understands the why and how to move forward from here. So that's a great resource for anyone, not just parents going through it. But we definitely touch on, our come to Jesus moment and how we've grown in our faith as a result. My husband especially. And that is my favorite part of the whole movie is the dad's perspective and his heart for his daughter. We hear from the mama bears all the time. We don't hear a lot from the dads. And I'm trying to figure that out. I don't know if it has to do with traditional gender roles, like moms take care of the kids or what, but I'm just so proud that he shared his story and his heart so openly, including his coming into faith as a result of what happened.
That's really beautiful. I will absolutely watch this, Erin, and I look forward to it. I think the dads are probably so overwhelmed and so hurt and don't want to overreact. It must be absolutely overwhelming if you define yourself as a provider and a caretaker for your family, and then a member of your family is flailing. It must be even harder. I'm just so happy to know you. I'm very happy that the audience gets to hear about you. We will put the names at the bottom of the podcast. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience and wisdom with us today. Thank you, Erin.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me on The Gold Report, where we hope to inspire you to become 10% more courageous. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. See you next week.